Okay, so I've finally gotten brave enough to tackle one of our community's favorite cultural dishes, which is Mandazi. This is a risen, yeasted bread that's then fried, very similar to a donut or to Indian fry bread. It comes from West Africa, and so we're going to be cooking that today on Cooking with Mr. Tolley. Mandazi is a pretty straightforward dish. It is a risen yeasted dough, and most of the ingredients for this are pretty commonplace and pretty easy to put together. So to make Mandazi, you are going to need 3.5 cups of flour, 5 teaspoons of sugar, 2 teaspoons of yeast, 1 teaspoon of baking powder, and 1/2 teaspoon of salt. So these are your dry ingredients. A lot of times when you make dishes similar to this, you will make them by combining them together in dry and then wet ingredients. So the very first thing we have to do is we just have to combine all of this together. So I'm going to put my sugar, my flour, my yeast, my baking soda, and my salt all together into a big bowl. All right, so that's all my dry ingredients. Interestingly, this one does not call for me to blossom the yeast, which is fine. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. So the next thing that I'm going to do is I am going to add my wet ingredients. So my wet ingredients are 1 egg, 1 cup of warm milk, and 4 teaspoons of butter. Now you'll notice that I already have my butter and my milk together. And the reason why is I combine those together to warm up my milk. So I started warming my milk, I added in my butter, and I just let the warming milk melt my butter. So the next thing I have to do is I have to combine together my wet ingredients. So I'm going to do that. All right, all I have left to do now is to put my wet ingredients into my dry ingredients. So I'm actually going to be using a fork for this next one because it's gonna get a little stiff. This is a lot of dry to not as much wet. So I'm going to dump my wet ingredients in and I'm just gonna mix it up with a fork. All right, so the next step is you're gonna have to knead this. So it's a little loose. You can't quite get it all together with a fork, so you're gonna knead it together. I like to knead it in the bowl. I could turn it out onto the work surface, but I don't see a real reason to. Now, the recipe in the Virtual Cultural Night Cookbook does not call for this next step that I'm gonna do, but I'm gonna do it anyways. This is a risen dough. Because it uses yeast. And so I'm going to, once I have all of this combined together, I'm going to set it aside for like an hour to rise. And in an hour, I'll be able to do the next step. So we'll get to that in just a second. I'll come back and I will have it all set and we will go from there into the actual frying process. All right, so here's my dough. It's been about an hour. I'm going to kind of flatten it out to get to the shape I want. So I'm gonna make mine square-shaped Mandazi, which is what I'm most comfortable and familiar with. So I need to knead out my dough. You could also do this by rolling it out. I'm just trying to get it pretty thin, not super thin. I'd say about 1/2 inch thin, and big on the sides. And what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be cutting this into 2 by 2 squares. So 2 inches by 2 inch squares. And I've got some oil set up getting ready to fry. So like with any fried food, it's very important that you are aware of about how that works. So knowing how hot your oil is, knowing how to fry safely, having specialized tools. I'll be using a spider. This is a basket spider. And that way I'm not getting myself too close to the oil. Also, if you make sure that you cook your stuff at the right temperature, it doesn't get as fat because the oil cooks the outside quickly and doesn't allow a lot to seep in. Whereas if you try to cook the oil and it's not hot enough, you'll usually end up with problems. So I'm going to eyeball this. I'm not going to be too strict about being accurate and precise, but I'm going to cut it about in half, and then I'm going to kind of figure about how wide that is and I'm going to cut down. Now, if I was making these professionally, I would cut off the edges to make them not round, make them nice and square. But I'm not doing this professionally. I'm doing this at home for fun. So I'm not going to worry about having perfectly shaped Mandazi. And you'll see I have about 8 total Mandazi out of that. Now, this is where things get a little vague for me. I've never made these before. These seem a little big to me, so I could cut them smaller, and I think I'm going to do that because I want kind of more bite-sized Mandazi, plus they are going to puff, so I'm going to go ahead and cut these down. This is actually one of my favorite parts about cooking, is the process of trying out things and hoping you get it right. I could be doing this wrong, and I'm sure that my friends who are from West Africa who watch this will have lots of laughs at Mr. Tolley's cooking of Mandazi. But at the same time, I enjoy the process of trying. If I'm wrong, it's not a big deal. I'll eat them and I'll enjoy them and I'll go from there. So the next thing I gotta do is fry these. I will make sure that my oil is ready, and then I will start showing you what that looks like. All right, so there's a couple ways to check your oil. You can see I'm doing one right now, which is just a drop test. This one's been in there for a little bit. It's not gonna be my best piece, but you'll see it's small. The best way, of course, to control your oil temperature is to have a thermometer, but I broke my thermometer, so I can't have a thermometer in mine. I wanted about 350 degrees for the oil if I do have my thermometer, but you can see, hopefully, that we're getting little bubbles around this piece of Mandazi that's in there right now. That's telling me that the oil is approaching hot enough. I'm going to drop in a new piece, and if it works, it should start bubbling pretty quickly and actually rise to the surface even quicker than that. I think my oil is still a little bit cold, but this is a way to check for that. I'm gonna pop this one around. Yeah, it's not getting too dark, which means my oil needs, there it goes, popping up. My oil needs a little bit more time to warm up. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop that, and I'll bring it back in when I got a good rolling fry go. All right, my oil is ready. When I drop in my thing, you'll see it immediately goes into a nice rolling boil. I'm going to fry these in batches of 4. Every time you add something to oil, you bring the temperature down. So you want to make sure that when you are cooking anything in oil, you don't crowd the batch. I might do batches of 5. I got a big enough pot. I got a deep pot here. I probably got about 3 inches of oil in my pot right now. I'm just going to let them fry to a nice golden brown. So I'll show you what that looks like. All right, and that should be my Mandazi done when they get that nice golden brown color. It would be a good idea on the first batch that you make to cut them open just to make sure they cooked, because if your oil's too hot, they will cook faster than, they brown on the outside faster than they cook on the inside. And you want to make sure that you don't have undercooked donuts. So that's how you make Mandazi. We'll have a picture of those up, and I hope you had fun cooking with Mr. Tolley.